Welcome back to the Tailgate, guys. Today we're going to talk about conversations to have with your harvest facility. But before we get too deep into that, tell me what a fat calf truly looks like.
That seems to be the elusive answer for a lot of folks. When is that calf actually ready to harvest? And to put it in very simple terms, that calf needs to have a rounded appearance. You know, where we may see hook bones and pin bones, that type of thing, as that calf is growing, maybe even a rib on the very back of the rib cage. As that animal finishes, he lays down fat from front to back.
And top to bottom.
And top to bottom. So therefore, probably the best place to look to see if that calf is getting close is to move toward the back of that calf and look at the pin bones, which are on either side of the tail, right in that area. As that tail turns and goes down, look for some fat deposition right there. That will be one of the last places that we'll see fat. And if you can touch this calf, walk up and actually touch it and see if it's soft. That's where that calf will lay down fat toward the end of that finishing phase. And don't be afraid to feed a few extra days if necessary. Of course, now your harvest date is going to dictate when you have to harvest that animal. But what we want to do is make sure we get to that finished stage before that kill date or harvest date and work from there. So again, making sure that that animal is finished, because that's going to be the big indicator for your eating experience whenever you take this animal home.
Another key way to know is fat jiggles when they walk, muscle does not. So watch them as they move around the pen. If we're seeing jiggles of pone fat on either side of that tail head, or jiggles of fat in the brisket and things of that sort, softening of the rear flank, that calf is finished. When we think about other conversations to have with the harvest facility shortly before we're ready to bring that calf in, one thing that comes to my mind that I think a lot of people take for granted is making sure that we do not feed that calf the morning we take it to the harvest facility. You think about what happens when they harvest this calf. They're removing the interior portions, the rumen, the intestines, and that sort of thing. We want to make sure that's as empty as we can because of a food safety concern. So don't feed it before you take him to the harvest facility.
And the other thing to remember is that that animal does not have time to process that feed. So again, not only a food safety thing, but kind of a stress thing as well. With a full stomach and going into a new place, lots of strange noises, those kinds of things, it's really not good for the overall health of that carcass whenever you harvest that calf. And the other thing to remember is that a lot of folks think that they don't have a choice in the cuts of meat that they have.
Absolutely
and
not.
One thing that will always be true with harvesting of any calf is that you're going to have lots and lots and lots of ground beef.
Absolutely.
Sometimes more ground beef than you have recipes to utilize, and there's only so many hamburgers you can eat and meatloafs that you can eat. So Sarah, tell us a way that we can minimize the amount of ground beef that we get out of the carcass, because even though it may be minimal, it's still going to be plenty.
I think it's important to get a cut sheet from your harvest facility in advance so you have a chance to look that over, research any questions that you may have about the cuts of beef that your harvest facility can do, and talk it over with your family, or if you're doing this a custom feeding situation, to talk it over with your client to make sure they're informed as to what their options are, so nobody's making any snap decisions the day that we're taking the calf to harvest when we have to tell the facility exactly what we want out of this calf. There are lots of different resources out there online, or you can even check in with your local extension office, and they can share with you all the different cuts of beef that can be done nowadays to help minimize that ground beef. A common example that lots of people have heard of is a flat iron steak, there are petite shoulder tenders, there are blade steaks. There are all sorts of different ways that we can take the portions of that animal that would normally be ground into ground beef and cut some more tender cuts out of them that's a little bit different than maybe it was 15, 20 years ago to help minimize that ground beef. So it's very important that you get that cut sheet ahead of time and figure out what your processor can do. Some other questions that they're going to ask you that morning: how do you want your ground beef packaged? Do you want 1 pound packs, 2 pound packs, 5 pound packs? How big do you want your roast? Do you want a 2 pound roast, a 3 pound roast? What do you want? Because your harvest facility, your processor, is trying to make sure that they provide you with the cuts that you want out of the calf that you have raised. And the only way that we can make sure that we have exactly what we want is to make sure we've done our research and know what we're asking for. The other thing I think is important to point out is there's only so many steaks in a calf. There's only so many ribeyes, there's only so many sirloins, there's only so many fillets. So we hear this a lot. People will get a calf harvested and they'll say, there was only 8 or 10 ribeyes in my entire calf. That's because that's how many ribeyes that calf had. You know, there's only so many sirloins. Well, there's only 2 sirloin muscles in a calf, so it's based upon how thick you cut your steaks as to how many you get. Where we have a little more flexibility is in the shoulder portions of the calf and the quarter portions of the calf. We can turn those into roasts, we can turn some of those into steaks, and we can turn quite a bit of that into ground beef still yet.
And it's important to remember, too, that you may not think that you got all your meat back because you had this really large calf that you took to a harvest facility. But it's important to remember that of the live weight of that calf, on the low end, about 50% of that body weight is going to be a hanging carcass. It can go all the way up to about 65%, but usually most of them range in the 60% range. So to make the math easy, you take a 1,000-pound calf, he's going to hang about a 600-pound carcass. So even though you had 1,000 pounds, that's not all meat. And number two, as you process that carcass into the individual cuts and you debone and you take certain parts out, that 600 pounds may be reduced as much as 35% from the fact that as we processed, we deboned a lot of this meat. So again, take that into consideration. 1,000-pound calf, 600-pound carcass, you may lose up to about 150 or 60 pounds of that 600 pounds by the time you process that hanging carcass into usable cuts. So kind of calculate that. Know what your calf weighs whenever you take him. If you're going across, going to the harvest facility and there's a place where you can drive across a set of scales and then weigh empty as you come back, that gives you an idea of about what that calf weighed. So again, when you take a calf to a harvest facility, the likelihood of getting back 60% of that calf's live weight is pretty slim. But again, you can calculate that and know about what you should have. And that's what your hanging carcass weight and or your processed weight is what you're going to pay that processor for. And processing charges are expensive, so talk to your harvest facility whenever you set that date up so that you're prepared for that particular cost whenever you get there. So with that in mind, I think we pretty well covered the conversations that you need to have. Sarah, do you have anything to add?
I do. I think it's important to be prepared when you go to pick up that calf.
Yes.
Make sure you have plenty of coolers, make sure you have plenty of freezer space, and make sure that that product is frozen before you leave the harvest facility with it. I think that's key in making sure that you have a pleasant eating experience down the road.
And that is something that most harvest facilities will work with you on to make sure that your pickup date not only is convenient for you and your schedule, but also to allow plenty of time for that meat to be totally frozen all the way through before you pick it up. But I always take a couple of extra coolers just in case.
And I think it's important to emphasize the fact that if this is the first time you've raised a freezer beef or the first time that you've purchased a freezer beef, 400, in the neighborhood of 400 pounds of beef is a lot of beef. It's a lot more beef than you think it is. It's easily a truck bed full by the time you put it in coolers. So just be prepared for that. Make sure that you have enough freezer space at home.
Join us again on the Tailgate University. We'll see you in the next one.